I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm Connor Ruebusch. With me is Patrick Wyman. Combined, our podcasting record stands at 112, 10, and 2 with one no contest. 52 wins via verbal submission, parentheses boredom. And we are here to share all of that knowledge and hard-earned experience with you. This is Heavy Hands.
That was excellent. That was an excellent intro, man.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're getting better at this. I like where your head's at here.
Thank you. I started collecting ideas in a document so that I have a well to draw from. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are happy to have you here, and we have quite a mixed bag of a show for you today. We are going to cover some events that happened recently. We're going to look forward to some events that are taking place in the near future. And, we are also probably between every other sentence going to grumble about Mayweather and McGregor because people were unhappy. We didn't discuss it on last week's show. We recorded before the announcement was made. I don't know, Pat. I'll be honest. I'm looking forward to the time until we have to start talking about that, because while there are certainly interesting angles to the fight, many of them have to do with like the business and culture of combat sports.
Literally none of the angles that are interesting in this fight have anything to do with anything that happens in the ring.
Yeah.
Like, I wrote about this extensively for Deadspin. I wrote about a 2,000-word piece entitled, I think appropriately, Conor McGregor is fighting Floyd Mayweather. What the fucking fuck? Which entirely sums up my feelings about it. But like, this is to look at this as a fight or combat sports or sports period entirely misses what makes this fight meaningful. Like, it has nothing to do with any of that. The product is not what's going to happen in the 400 square feet of the ring on August 26th. The product is the build. The product is the takes, frankly. Like, it's pop culture. Like, the nature of pop culture, if you're trying to make a product for that, like whether it's a pop song or a movie or like a self-help book or, who the fuck cares, whatever it is, the idea is that you're not turning off any potential audiences, that the broadest possible segment of society is rendered able to consume your product. And you're not trying to get all of them. You're just trying to skim a little bit from everybody. And that's what Mayweather McGregor is. It's accessible to anybody. There's no barrier to entry for having an opinion about Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor or wanting to purchase it. You could sell it to you could sell it to anybody. You could sell it to hardcore combat sports fans, or you could sell it to moms who watch The View who are pissed about Floyd Mayweather's domestic violence and want to watch him get his ass beat. Like, it's perfect for the world that we live in because you don't have to know anything about it to have an opinion on it.
Yeah, it's kind of awful.
You can buy it.
It's kind of awful for that reason. But I'm going to play the part of the old curmudgeon, which I've been playing very well since I was probably about 16. But it feels very empty to me because we know, you and I agree, as you just said, there's really no substance to the fight. Which, ostensibly is the reason that we watch most fights, is that even if I'm always talking about how narrative and character, personality, and promotion, those play a huge role in how invested you're going to be in a bout, the fight is still the culmination. And in this, the fight is not going to be the culmination, really, of all the trash talk. It won't be the perfect... it's very unlikely that it'll be any kind of like perfect ending to all of the buildup. It'll be kind of empty buildup. It'll be essentially... And the thing with pop culture is... part of the reason you get invested in it is because it's pop culture. You know what I mean? You're joining the phenomenon. You're joining the event, the thing that the rest of the crowd is looking at. So it's like, this is like the Kardashian of combat sports, where it's famous because it's famous, and we're really just paying a bunch of money to watch two guys make a bunch of money. It's a weird thing.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly correct. These are genuine famous people, famous and people all capitalized, and we're paying to watch them talk about themselves for 2 months beforehand. And they are effectively, and I think this is true of both fighters to some extent, and I'm sure that there are going to be some Conor McGregor fans out there who are going to yell at me for this, but like they are to some extent a blank canvas onto which their fans can project their hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
And the general public too. Like, I don't think McGregor is a bad guy by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's actually by deed more so than word. I think he's actually a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
Like he helps people in need and
pretty
was
generous,
firmly on
pretty loyal.
I'm sorry?
Pretty generous, pretty loyal. He's not a bad guy.
Like he used his platform to help support the same-sex marriage in Ireland. Like I think he is not a bad guy. Mm-hmm. Floyd Mayweather, on the other hand, is. But McGregor, what people like about McGregor is not that stuff. It's that he is a blank canvas onto which they can project their aspirational dreams. And the same is true in a much darker way of Floyd Mayweather. Mm-hmm. And this fight is basically taking the two of them and those particular personality characteristics and making them writ large so that everybody, not just the people who know them, not just people within our particular bubbles, as expanded as those may be to accommodate two figures like McGregor and Mayweather, but to allow all of society to paint onto that canvas,
Yeah.
So that's the level on which we should be talking about this fight.
Sure.
Not can McGregor land the left hand? Like,
because look, if it
cares at this point,
if it happens, we won't have predicted that it'll happen because it's very unlikely. And if it doesn't happen, it'll be exactly what we you know what I mean? Like, there's not even any tension in wondering if that'll happen. For me, not yet anyway. Maybe the week of the fight, I'll start to feel that, like, well, maybe, who knows? But
it's one of those things that's not for us.
It's really not.
None of that is for us.
It's not.
Like, I think it's a fucking Transformers movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or a Katy Perry song. Like, which is fine. Like, I'm not going to hate on you for listening to and enjoying a Katy Perry song, I will hate on you a little bit for watching a Transformers movie because Jesus Christ, Michael Bay.
These are for the people when you ask them, oh, what kind of sports do you like? They say, oh, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's for people who have in their closets a Duke basketball jersey, a New York Yankees hat,
and a Steelers
Lakers
towel.
Jersey. Yeah, and an NFL jersey that's half Steelers and half Cowboys. Like that's who this is for.
Yeah.
Which like those are popular things. There are a lot of those people. Like if you're trying to sell something, that's a good audience to try to sell to.
Yeah, why the fuck not? Yeah, it's a weird one. Feels a little weird and empty, but it's coming up. We will talk about it more before it happens. Although, again, it's not really... There's not a ton we can say about it from our usual perspective. So maybe we can, when that time does come, we could bring in somebody else. Maybe talk a little more about the business side of it or something. Not our usual approach, but that is probably where the most interest lies regarding this fight.
I'll be writing about that extensively beforehand. Yeah. I've already written a little bit about it, and there are really interesting angles to it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. Just not, like the fight, the product is done once the walkouts start. Like at that point, I think it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree. It is what it is. Let's talk about the fights that we have that have actually happened recently, that are actually happening soon, and ones in which the substance of the fight itself are probably the most interesting aspects. UFC Singapore, I thought, delivered a fairly satisfying event. I knew the main event was not going to be the most fun fight in the world to watch. Confounding my expectations once again, the fact that it was not a super exciting fight seems once again to have disappointed people or surprised them, which I don't understand. There's been a lot of discussion about, Holly Holm. She fought Bethe Correia. I should say what we're talking about here. Holly Holm fought Bethe Correia. She had two very uneventful rounds, landed a head kick in the third round, knocked Bethe Correia out. Very impressive, but not much leading up to it. And there was a lot of discussion after the fight that Holm was saying, I knew people would boo my game plan. People were like, oh, well, it was her game plan. And then people were asking, do you think it really was a game plan to be so slow and boring? Or do you think it just happened and she's making an excuse? My question is, why do people even still have these questions? How is this not exactly what you expect from a Holly Holm fight? This looked like a Holly Holm fight to me.
Because the one not Holly Holm performance was the one that everybody saw and had seared into their memory by, her shin just taking Ronda Rousey's head clean off.
Holly Holm is Ryan Jimmo. May he rest in peace. But Ryan Jimmo came to the UFC, knocked a dude out in 6 seconds, and everyone's like, this Ryan Jimmo guy. Meanwhile, all of the people who had actually watched his career before that point were like, no, he's really boring, and weird things happen in all of his fights. And lo and behold, that's what the rest of his UFC career was like.
Yeah, basically. I mean, we discussed this on last week's episode, and I stand by the take, which is that Holly Holm is who she showed us in her first 2 UFC fights and has showed us since then. Like, now with that said, I think she looked pretty good here by Holly Holm standards.
Yeah.
If we take as the point of comparison non-Ronda Rousey Holly Holm performances, I thought this was a better version. I thought she took better angles. I thought her footwork was cleaner. Her distance management was better. She didn't do a whole lot with that until Mark Goddard warned them, they need to get something done. But while she didn't do a whole lot with it, I thought she looked better. Maybe that's because she was fighting Betch Correia, and because Correia was shorter and not as fast and didn't have a lot of tools to deal with it. But I thought that in that vacuum, at least, Holm looked a little sharper.
Yeah, well, I think there's maybe something to be said for Holm's fight with Rousey even affecting her a little bit. That maybe for the last few fights, we have seen, the typical limitations of Holm, but maybe not the typical approach. In that, like, she's been a little, like, for example, when she fought Valentina Shevchenko, I think that had that been a boxing match, had that been 5 years ago, Holly Holm would probably have fought a really patient outside fight and made Shevchenko lead. It would have been an even slower fight than it was. But it ended up being fairly interesting only because Holm just kept running into Shevchenko's counters. She was trying to make something happen. And that never really used to be her game. And it wasn't in the Betch Correia fight. Nothing happened because Correia wasn't athletic enough, nor did she pressure enough to make it happen. And Holm, I think she's a neutralizer who has good enough weapons to catch you by surprise with one big shot. Usually, it's almost always a head kick, sometimes a body kick. But I think maybe this is kind of her just doing what she needed to do in this fight, which maybe that's what she's talking about when she says, I knew people would boo the game plan. Maybe the lesson for her before this fight was, do not try to make it a fight. Just do what you do until the openings start to appear. And, so yeah, it worked. She stayed safe. She wasn't in trouble. She didn't have any dangerous, dicey exchanges. The first 2 rounds, it's hard to say what the hell happened in them, but it kept her in position to look for that head kick and to look for these little shots that could squeak out rounds for her. That's what she's done for her boxing career and all of her MMA career. I thought she did. Knowing what to expect from Holly Holm, I thought she did the Holly Holm game very effectively this night.
Yeah, I think I think you're absolutely right about what it is that she actually does well. And I'm not sure why she's kind of gotten away from that. Is it because she feels like she has to make something happen? Like there's pressure on her to do that? That's kind of what friend of the show, Julie Kedzie, seemed to be hinting at, is that Holm puts a lot of pressure on herself and that it's hard when you're not in that position to understand what that does to your head in a fight. So that's possible. I think that's definitely a potential thing.
She certainly got countered a lot by Shevchenko and Durandamy.
That's true, yeah.
And she didn't really adjust to that over the course of the fight. It was like she kept trying to make something happen. And we both probably agree that Holm is at her absolute worst when she's lunging forward with her big, her telegraphed yet powerless punches. She's just too easy to read. She needs to be outside. You need to be coming towards her. And maybe now and then she will steal a good shot. That's just like a quick peck from outside. But that's what she does. That's what she did as a boxer,
Well, that's really her game, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think... I genuinely don't know why it is that her MMA game feels so much different or has felt so much different. And I think maybe it's because she's facing more patient fighters who don't feel the need to do that to her. Like,
I think she's fighting just better fighters. I will flatly say that I think her MMA opposition, as few opponents as she's had, has on the whole mostly been better than most of the people she fought in boxing. She had some very good boxing matches. She fought Anna Sophia Mathis, and I think she fought Christy Martin. Like, she fought some legit fighters. But for the most part, it was like journeywomen, which are really all there is to be had at like 147 pounds for women, or 135 or whatever it was that she fought at.
I think it was 147. I mean, yeah, it's not like there were better opponents available for her to face that she wasn't facing. It's just that
there was a very shallow talent pool.
I mean, like, and so, yeah, I think that's probably right. I think that on a skills level, Rocky Pennington is better than practically anybody that she could have fought in boxing. Jermaine Durandamy, absolutely the case. Like, there's, I think that's probably part of it. I think she's facing people. She's now facing people who don't feel the need to try to play into her game plan.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought Miesha Tate fought her absolutely brilliantly. Like Tate put herself in position to make Holm make mistakes, and when she did, Tate was there to capitalize. Like I thought that was the quintessential anti-Holly Holm performance.
Yeah, even if Tate was going into the 5th round, probably losing the fight.
Yeah, because she was putting herself in in position to capitalize if and when Holm did make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And Holm, while she is a really, really good fighter, Holm always makes mistakes. Holm is not one of those fighters, except in the Rousey fight, I think, who puts together like perfect performances. You know?
Yeah. That's why that fight was so stunning. It was very different from anything we'd seen from Holly Holm before. A very different matchup, very different result. Very different, just sort of one-way momentum to the fight almost. And, that's never been what people should expect from Holly Holm's fights. She looked okay. She looked like Holly Holm, and she looked like a slightly more comfortable version of Holly Holm than we've seen in maybe her last 3. So, it was fine. I expected it to be slow. It was slow. Hard to be disappointed when you come in knowing what to expect. Although I will admit, having Holly Holm once again in the main event slot, it always does, at this point, it does feel like a bit of a downer after what was a pretty satisfying card. Let's move on to some of the other performances that we saw. Colby Covington defeated Dong Hyun Kim in what I thought was a very impressive performance. I know we got a lot of boos. Colby Covington's cringeworthy post-fight interview and his comments on Twitter. I love him. I think it's great. I love seeing Colby Covington be this sort of like cornball trash talker. I think that's totally fine.
He's if we're breaking down heels into various categories, Colby Covington is what we would call the doofus heel.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's, I think, pretty remarkably unself-aware, and
sure,
and but at the same time entirely self-aware, because I think he knows that he's a fucking doofus on some basic level, and it's just like, yeah, that's who I am. And you know what? Like in combat sports, that's what works. Not having a persona, like. If you have a persona, unless you're Chael Sonnen and you can so fully inhabit your persona that the lines between that and who you really are become blurred to the point of non-existence, like you need to be who you are if you want people to get on board with it. And I think this is exactly who Colby Covington is. This is the same dude who got in a bar fight with a blood alcohol content when he was at the university, or when he was at Oregon State with a BAC somewhere in the .20s. Like he is that dude. That is who Colby Covington is.
He's a little bit of a doofus with an attitude and a phenomenally good wrestler. It has to be said, man. Colby Covington. I said this right after I watched the fights. I watched them Saturday afternoon after they'd aired. Colby Covington might have the best knee tap I've seen. He's certainly got the best, one of the best knee taps in MMA. It's a beautiful takedown.
Who else would be up there? Like Frankie Edgar and Khabib?
Yeah, Edgar, Dominic Cruz, Khabib.
Oh, yeah, Cruz, yeah.
You know, but the way Covington sets his up from the clinch and how quickly and how smoothly he gets it and how well he drives through, he was able to take down Dong Hyun Kim with an ease that no one else, no other opponent of Kim's has been able to manage, which was pretty astounding to me.
We did talk about this a little bit on last week's episode, the extent to which Kim has kind of been inflated.
Yeah.
And is maybe not quite as good as he appears at first glance. But with that said, to outgrind Dong Hyun Kim is like, that's a pretty serious accomplishment. Yeah. And I think Covington is exactly what he purports to be. Like, I think it's him and Usman. One of the two of them is going to be the future champion in this division.
Yeah, it does not seem unlikely to me. We've got basically and I think Covington may even find more success because I think while he has very clearly worked on his striking and he does like to exchange punches, like you can see that. You could see it in this fight. He would get tagged and a grin would come over his face and he'd go in there and land 3 good shots. And he's not bad at it. He's getting better by pretty remarkable strides.
Working with Jorge Masvidal's boxing coach.
Nice. Now. That makes sense. Yeah, and you can see that. Like he's a fairly technical boxer, still a little janky. The maybe the caulking isn't there between all of the joints, but he's working on it. And but I think more so than Usman even, despite those developments, he really embraces just being a really heavy blanket. You know, like he's just going to take you down. He's going to choke the life out of you, and he said that in his post-fight interview. I think he said he liked watching the life drain out of his opponents. That's how he liked to win. He wanted to
he's
watch
a
them.
mean son of a bitch.
Yeah.
That's what I like. Like, I genuinely like that. When I was talking about him as like the doofus heel, like he's like a comical asshole.
He would be cast very appropriately as like the lead henchman to a villain in a movie. He would be the muscle.
Would be perfect.
Yeah, like kind of dumb, very mean, and evil. Like that would be Colby Covington's character.
He's like you would call him the banality of evil. Like but I say this not to detract from him, but I think these are all positives.
Sometimes fighters listen to this show, and if Colby Covington listens to this, he is not going to be pleased.
He's not going to be pleased. No, huh? But like I want to make as overwhelmingly clear as possible that I enjoy Colby Covington's game. I think he's a really good fighter.
Absolutely.
And I enjoy his heelness. Like I enjoy the way that he goes about that. Like because he seems to get it on some basic level.
Right. The thing he posted on Twitter, like it was just goofy enough. I'm like, I think he knows this is kind of silly, but he's just having a good time. Chaos, he's just being a goddamn goofball.
Right. Yeah, man, I'm here for it. I'm here for Covington. Like, and like I said, I really think he's going to be the dude. This is an aging division, and we're going to have a lot of turnover here at the top in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Which is why it was a mistake for them to let Lorenz Larkin go, because Larkin was going to be one of these guys, and now instead they're going to have to wait for him to fight out that contract in Bellator, or for Bellator to collapse, one of the two. Take your pick. We're going to have to wait for him to come back. But Larkin was going to be one of these guys. He was going to be your future top 5 guy. Now, I mean, I think Covington is ready for a top 5 dude. Who's up here that we could match him up with that would be good, Connor?
Good question, because I think this does sort of presage that turnover. We've got 35-year-old, like 10-year UFC veteran Dong Hyun Kim getting toppled by 27-year-old, borderline top 15 Colby Covington. Like, this is the start of a new generation of challengers probably taking over, of top contenders. Let's see. Fighter rankings for welterweight. Let's see what the UFC rankings say. Mm-hmm. They've got Damian Maia. It's a very strange division right now. We've got Maia. We've got Wonderboy. We've got Robbie Lawler. We got Masvidal. We got Magny. I think that Colby Covington could beat a few of those guys.
I think he beats...
I think he might beat Thompson, and I think he might... I mean, he won't fight Masvidal, but I think he might beat Magny as well. I think he would beat Magny.
Yeah, I think he beats Magny real handily. I think he could beat Stephen Thompson. I'm not sure he would. But I would put him in that fight. I think he could beat Robbie Lawler at this point.
He could.
I think that's a real tough matchup for him. It depends on how well Lawler can pull the trigger, and we won't know that until we see him fight Cerrone. Because I think that Lawler, in his last few fights, we've seen a decreasing ability to just let his hands go and throw.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is a pretty strong sign of aging. Like that to me is always sets off alarm bells in my head.
Yeah,
when I see a guy,
and a pretty bad habit against someone like Covington.
Yeah, because Covington, could he just hit you in the face, but also he could just wear on you and grind you.
Yeah.
What about would you be here for Covington RDA? Speaking of another guy who fought on this card, guy who made his welterweight debut here.
Sure. Yeah, I would watch that.
Yeah. What do you think? What did you think of RDA here against Tarek Saffiedine?
It looked pretty good. I think he said after the fight he felt like he had to make some adjustments for the new weight class, and it did feel like that a bit. But I don't think he looked like he had any problems. He looked healthy. He didn't look. I don't know. He was still a pressure fighter, but I think that's probably best for him. Like, I think some were maybe expecting him to be a little more mobile and use his speed, but I think his speed is going to come in handy at just lacing people with shots as he's pressuring them. I think he's always going to be most comfortable coming forward. I really enjoyed that this fight turned into a tie clinch battle. I did not expect that to be the main staging ground for this contest, but I really enjoyed the clinch exchanges. And I thought Dos Anjos showed some real craft, sort of like a very Thai clinch. You can tell he's trained at Evolve, that he's trained in Thailand, the way that he can turn what should be a bad position for wrestling. Like, he'll go for a collar tie, and Saffiedine will smother in and force RDA's elbow up over his own shoulder. So he's like in almost like an arm triangle position. And then he'll like turn, get that into like an over-the-head grip, and then turn back and get an underhook or get another collar tie. He's got really nice little adjustments, which you see those weird positions in Muay Thai all the time. And you see people finding ways to turn that into a position of control, even if they don't have the perfect collar tie that they set out to get. And landing elbows and knees off of that, I thought he looked pretty good. Saffiedine, once again, sort of puzzled me by continually engaging in the clinch with RDA. I don't know what that was about. same thing he did in his fight with Rick Story and in his fight with Dong Hyun Kim. So something weird is going on with Saffiedine. I think I've now pegged him. I've now settled on the idea that he is an overthinker, and it's now easy to look at everything he does through that lens. Maybe that's just my subconscious tricking me. But there is something strange about the way Saffiedine approaches fights, where he's obviously very good and still is very good. But just like after the first 2 or 3 minutes, just starts making weird decisions and not doing a whole lot.
Well, there's a whole brand of fighter that you can prepare however you want. They can learn whatever skills they want, and then they get into the fight, and they're just going to do whatever comes to them, you know? Like, and with fighters like that, I think there's a lot to be said for just figuring out how to channel that rather than trying to overthink the overthinking.
Did I talk about my hypothesis with him and Faraz on this show, or was that on the Vivisection?
I think that was on the Vivisection.
My sort of theory is that maybe Saffiedine, who I think was a little more consistent, before his injuries and before the UFC, I think maybe it's not the best thing for him that he's with Faraz. As much respect as I have for Faraz, I think maybe a guy like Saffiedine, if indeed he is an overthinker, and that seems likely, he's the sponge, he picks up things in the gym really well, but then in fights he makes weird decisions. It's like he's thinking, it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like he's reading too many things into his opponent. Kind of like how Aldo will not throw leg kicks because one gets countered. Saffiedine will be like, okay, now I have to shoot for takedowns because he's seeing the jab. You know what I mean? Like he gets these ideas that he has to mix it up when he can really just stick to what he does well. I think maybe the fact that Faraz is such a cerebral coach who likes talking on that sort of intellectual level to his fighters and giving them advice that way in the corner, and maybe that kind of relationship did not really bear the sort of fruit for Saffiedine that it should have. Maybe he would be better with a coach who would stop him thinking so much and just let him do. Just let him perform.
So I think that's what he did, though, because he was at Tiger Muay Thai for this camp.
Yeah, I noticed that Faraz was not in the corner this time.
Yeah, and I think that Tiger Muay Thai as a camp tends to let guys do things like that. Yeah. Not that they don't game plan or anything like that. I absolutely think they do. I think at some point we need to figure out more about Tiger Muay Thai, because it seems like they're doing really, really good things there with a wide array of different fighters.
Yeah.
So we should probably do some digging into that and report back to our friends and listeners here.
That's a good thought.
But because I think that a lot of the innovation in the game, to come back to something that you were talking about earlier, a lot of innovation in high-level MMA right now is being driven by camps like Tiger Muay Thai and Evolve, in large part because I think the next point of evolution is the clinch. Like, I think we're seeing guys use it offensively a lot more. I think we're seeing a lot more carryover from traditional Muay Thai, which has barely been tapped in terms of the variety of things that you can do in the clinch. It's guys like Tom Duquesnoy and Peter Yan, whom we talked about a few weeks ago on here, who are doing Thai-style things in the clinch. We saw RDA doing a lot of those. We saw Saffiedine doing a lot of those here.
Yeah.
Shevchenko
does things like that. Overeem has always done stuff like that. Matt Brown, of course. But we haven't really – it's not been a sort of a common phase for MMA fighters.
I think even Overeem's and to some extent even Brown's games now are going to look kind of old-fashioned by comparison to what we see. I think that Overeem's game is going to look old-fashioned by comparison to what we saw from RDA in this fight, from RDA and Saffiedine. I think this may be one of those fights where it's like looking at the future a little bit, something we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And especially for RDA, I think it's going to be very useful because he's not going to be as able to hit takedowns at this level. Yeah. That should be clear. Like he's got a nice functional wrestling game, but he's not incredibly technical with it, which makes sense given his background. That's not his background. He's not exceptionally deep with it, and he really needs the fence for it. So you're just going to be less able to hit takedowns against bigger, stronger guys in a wrestler-heavy division, unlike lightweight.
But being able to tie people up and smash them in the gut with knees and break their face with elbows, like that's something else you can do when you get them against the fence, which he still, in this fight, did very well.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with his footwork. In fact, his footwork looked great. There were moments where Saffiedine spun him towards the cage, and RDA would take two nice steps, pivot, and get right back to pressuring. He looked real good in that regard. I think he's got another 4 or 5 good fights in him.
At least, I think so. Yeah, at least. Dos Anjos, I think, and I think he'll get more comfortable at welterweight as he continues to fight there. I thought it was a pretty credible performance from him. I'm excited to see what he does next. It was actually cool to see him get a kick caught and end up on his back, which is not something we've really seen in recent fights. It was cool to sort of be reminded at just how cool and composed RDA is on the ground. Like he is very, very confident in his grappling ability. Even though he was on his back, he was never in a single moment of danger with Saffiedine on top of him. He attacked a few submissions. He tried a few sweeps. He held Saffiedine's head down. He denied him the arm triangle, and then he got back up. Like it was like a similar reminder to when he went to the ground with Donald Cerrone. I remember being at that fight live in their first fight. And I was like, oh, Cerrone's got a pretty good guard when he took him down. And the guy next to me, big fan of Rafa Dos Anjos, he was like, Cerrone's not going to submit him. And lo and behold, Dos Anjos just swam through Cerrone's very respectable guard. So it's funny to be reminded just how well-rounded he actually is. We now kind of think of him as this pressure kickboxer, but he is a really, really top-notch jiu-jitsu player. A couple other highlights that we don't really have to go deep into. I was quite shocked by Uluka Sasaki's win over Justin Scoggins. Scoggins, once again, just as in the Munoz fight, looked really good, seemed to be in control. I think he's even picking up some of the adaptations from his, I guess, brother-in-law, Stephen Thompson, who, now he's like putting together some of that counter pocket boxing that Stephen Thompson started to show after he really started to take MMA more seriously. And yet he is just profoundly chokeable. I don't know why that is. But Justin Scoggins just has fights, looks good, gets choked out. Someone can explain it to me. I don't really know what the problem is there. Do you have any notion?
It's bordering on Chael Sonnen.
Yeah, it is weird. He just seems to have, maybe there's just, Phil McKenzie said on Twitter that his style is maybe so unique that there's more pressure on him to figure out how it works. But I'm not sure. I think maybe he's just a little too willing to scramble for his own good, that he just gives up his back right away, because they are usually rear naked chokes.
I don't have a good explanation for you.
It's a strange phenomenon.
Yeah, very strange. Sorry about the leaf blower, which sounds like it's literally right next to me. Jesus Christ, it's almost comical. Like, I don't know quite what to make of Scoggins at this point, because it's one of those things where he could either fix this and he becomes an instant contender because he's really good at the things that he wants to do. Yeah,
he's one of the most promising guys in either flyweight or bantamweight. Like, he is a very skilled, very talented fighter.
Yeah, or this just becomes a thing that haunts him through his entire career and he never fixes it. And he's like karate Chael Sonnen.
Yeah, or karate Anthony Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to. I really don't know what to do with it. But like, there's got to be a thing about South Carolina karate guys, because I remember somebody telling me before Stephen Thompson's last fight, like, he needs to spend less time teaching kids karate classes and more time drilling jiu-jitsu escapes. And is that the issue here, that like these dudes just think they're going to out-athlete their way out of it?
That seems like it with Scoggins, because he has a real knack for scrambles. He's very good in them. But you do get the sense that it's more instinct than drilled skill. And so maybe, he's just too bold in how he scrambles with people and just gives up his back. I think have they all been rear naked chokes that he's lost by?
There was the Pedro Munoz. Pedro Munoz was a guillotine, right?
2 guillotines and a rear naked. So, but two kind of submissions.
But the guillotine actually came from the back. Munoz got his back and then transitioned around to a guillotine, if memory serves correctly. Yeah, so who knows what the issue is there. Li Jinglong had a phenomenal fight with Frank Camacho. Was my pick for the best fight on the card, and I think it delivered in that sense. Russell Doan got a very surprising win over Kwan Ho Kwok, which was surprising to me, and we finally got to see Russell Doan look good in a fight. He's had some really good moments in recent fights, been out-wrestled by big, strong, aggressive wrestlers, and given a more favorable style matchup, it was nice to see him actually show how good he is, because we have seen flashes. We knew that Russell Doan had more to offer than his 4-fight losing streak would suggest. Naoki Inoue looked really good in his UFC debut. That's probably about all we need to discuss from UFC Singapore. After this break, we are going to talk for just a little bit about the rematch between Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev, which we missed last week. It really snuck up on us because I feel like they didn't promote this goddamn fight at all. Literally forgot it was happening.
Yeah, like I knew they had a rematch clause. I was looking forward to it in the back of my mind, and then looked at the calendar last week. We were literally looking at events last week and thought, Holy shit, Ward Kovalev is speaking. We just recorded the episode. We missed it. So we have to talk about it now that it's played out. It was different, but certainly no less controversial an ending than the last fight. We will talk about that and then move on to UFC. Oh my gosh, what is the next one? Chiesa versus Lee, a.k.a. UFC Oklahoma City after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about it. Ward Kovalev. Interesting fight. I kind of want to get your read on it, Pat, because I have sort of like an overarching narrative that I felt from this fight. More feel than real technical analysis, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, so did you watch it? Let me ask you this first. Did you watch it live or did you watch it knowing the outcome?
I watched it live.
Okay, so I watched it knowing the outcome, and it's really hard for me to separate knowing the outcome from the way that I watched the fight. And that's a flaw. I know, and I think that's going to lead to some flaws in my analysis here. But what was really striking to me, there were two things. First of all was Ward's defense, which I thought was really realistic and really sharp and really good. It wasn't always pretty, but I thought he did a really good job of making it hard for Kovalev to hit him. Yep. And more importantly than making it hard for Kovalev to hit him, making it hard for Kovalev to hit him cleanly. I think that was really frustrating for Kovalev. Yep. And it limited Kovalev's volume, which was important, and that's what allowed Ward to get his own offense going. The second was just Ward's body work. Obviously contributed to the finish, but he eschewed going to the head throughout the fight in order to bank body work for later.
He hardly hit the head at all until like the fifth round.
Yeah, and at that point it was mostly picking him off with jabs or one or two shots at a time. Yeah. Basically everything that he threw in power and in combination for most of the fight was to the body, and he was throwing counter punches to the body too. Shout out to friend of the show Schwan Humes, big fan of counter punching to the body. It's not something you see a whole lot of, but it was beautiful. It was great work, and
go on, sorry.
And it paid off. That was it.
Yeah, even though the right hand, like the cross counter to the body, when somebody jabs, you slip inside, and with that motion of the slip, you drop like a wide right or a straight right to the ribs, the floating ribs. That's maybe one of the oldest counters in boxing. You will see that move in every single boxing manual from like the 18th and 19th centuries. But it's not really common. For that same time body counter, Ward hit that a lot. He's always had a good right hook, a wide right to the body. I like the way he throws it too. He kind of throws it like the way Ray Robinson would throw his quote-unquote candy cane punch, where instead of throwing it like a hook with the thumb facing him, he'll throw it more like a cross with the thumb down and sort of turn it over like a Cuban hook, like a casting punch, dig that top knuckle, the back of that index knuckle into the rib cage. Very, very hurtful to take a shot like that to the body. And a lot of the headshots that Ward landed came off of the body shots. A lot of times it would be like a left hook after throwing that right to the body, or it would be a little jab as he was stepping away after throwing 3 or 4 punches to the body. I may comfort you to say, Pat, that even though, again, maybe my analysis is affected by the fact, and probably is, by the fact that I am quite a big fan of Andre Ward, which you could say colored my total acceptance of the decision in their first fight, which many people felt was an absolute robbery. In this bout, I felt watching it live that even as Kovalev was winning rounds, I could feel Ward taking the fight out of him. I thought that came through live even without knowing how it was going to end. I thought by about the fourth round, Ward had a few moments where it seemed like he kind of shook Kovalev up with a couple punches. Like, he didn't hurt him badly, but every time he would go to the body and maybe come up to the head, he'd hit him with a hook, and Kovalev would kind of blink. I think he was caught by surprise by the aggression in that approach. And then I think Kovalev talked, Schwan Humes was talking about this, our buddy Schwan was talking about how much shit Kovalev talked before the fight. That he was like, oh, like he didn't hurt me at all, he can't punch, I'm going to knock him out in the first round and all of this. Kovalev is, I think we agree, a bit of a bully, that he has that mentality. And while it's very difficult to sometimes bully a bully with strength, like there are some bullies who are so fragile that even if they're 3 feet taller than you, you can hit them once and they'll back down. Most bullies will get angry and fight back, and then they'll beat you up because they're bigger and stronger, and you will, you know what I mean? They'll still be your bully. I think the real way, like when I was a lame little nerd in high school, I would verbally spar with bullies. You know what I mean? It was super cringeworthy. It was not cool, but that was not their playing field. And that was what Ward did to Kovalev in this fight. He did not try to out-bully Kovalev on his terms. He frustrated him. And I got the sense watching this that Kovalev, who, by the way, landed a lot of good jabs and still has a very underrated jab. But I think the fact that he couldn't really land with anything but that jab really started to frustrate him. I think he was kind of itching to knock Ward out, so much so that he kind of took the fight out of himself. So to me, watching the end of this, the ending was very controversial. There was definitely some low blows in there, although I will point out Kovalev's trunks were extremely high. But Ward definitely hit him with a low blow in the finishing sequence. He definitely hit him with a low blow before that, earlier in the fight. But despite all of that, I still feel like watching the last few rounds, you're kind of seeing a mild no mas moment from Sergey Kovalev. Like he really didn't want anymore because the fight was going not at all how he expected it would go.
That shot to the solar plexus that Ward landed right before the finishing sequence, I saw him land that shot and I'm like, holy shit, the fight's over.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the hardest non-liver shots to the body I think I've ever seen. And the way that it hit a Kovalev who was already crouching over when he landed that, Jesus. I mean, like my insides hurt when I saw that punch land.
Yeah, it reminded me of Morales versus Zaragoza when Eric Morales landed a straight right to the body that bowled Zaragoza backwards off of his feet. Not enough people throw a good straight right to the body. Solar plexus is a good target, man.
It really is.
Yeah.
But so by the time the finishing sequence started, and there was absolutely a low shot in there. But, like if you're fighting Andre Ward, of course there's going to be low shots in there. Like that's how Andre Ward rolls. Like you don't sign the contract to fight Andre Ward thinking that your balls are going to get out
Wait
of
a minute. Wait a minute. He's fouling. I think he might have headbutted me too. No shit, kid. Welcome to
congratulations. You have figured out a substantial portion of Andre Ward's game.
Yeah, it's true.
Like leaving that aside, like the sheer nastiness with which he went to the body when he knew Kovalev was hurt there, and the way that built on round after round after round of mounting frustration, because I think there was a point right around the end of the fourth round where Kovalev tried to flurry on Ward when he hit the ropes, and he landed nothing clean in there. He landed like one glancing right hand that Ward rolled with, and then Ward comes back and hits him with a sharp jab, hits him with like a counter left hook, and then he hits him with a right hand to the body in fairly rapid sequence, like over the second half of the fourth round. And at that point, I'm like, oh, I don't think Kovalev's going to make it all the way.
Yeah.
Like even like I was aware that the fight was going to end, but I didn't know exactly how it ended. And that was my thought process. I'm like, oh yeah, no, Kovalev looks done here.
Knowing that Ward is not a huge puncher, I'll say watching live, I didn't get the feeling that Kovalev was going to get knocked out, but I got the sense around the exact same point that the fight was leaving him. So the ending had a bit more of an emphatic feeling for me, even watching it live, because maybe I'm reading into it too much, who knows, but there is this sort of feel in the momentum that Ward had the perfect strategy to take the fight out of Kovalev. His defense was really sharp. He did a lot of stepping inside Kovalev's punches, which he had trouble doing in the first fight. He looked a little tentative in the first fight, like he really had to he had to have the opportunity almost to feel Kovalev hurt him with a punch to know what he was stepping into when he moved inside. Because it was after. Go on.
Well, I think there was some real strategic brilliance to the way that Ward approached this fight.
Yeah.
In the sense that he was aware of what Kovalev was going to try to do to him and seemed much more realistic about how he was going to deal with that and what it felt like. That it was not surprising to him when Kovalev hit him, which Kovalev did. Like Kovalev, I think, did about as well as he possibly could have in the early going of this fight. And maybe he could have worked the body a little more. Maybe he could have just thrown shots. Like I think that there's something to be said for just letting your shots go. at some point and not letting yourself overthink it, which Kovalev started to do very clearly at one point.
Yep.
I think there were other things that Kovalev could have done, but I thought he was well prepared. I thought he was in good shape. I thought he had a good game plan. His footwork looked real good. I thought he did a good job of pursuing Ward and trying to capitalize when those opportunities appeared. The fact that he couldn't is a separate issue.
Yeah, and he hit Ward with more jabs than probably anybody else has. I mean, he really did not have a hard time landing that jab. He probably landed about at least 50% of the ones he threw. So yeah, he definitely was prepared. But I got this. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way the first fight played out. I think in that fight, you had to see Ward kind of get used to getting hit by Kovalev before he could feel comfortable. And in this fight, I think he already had that comfort.
Yeah, I think that's a real fundamental difference.
Yeah, that Ward came into this fight knowing what it was like to fight Sergey Kovalev. And when you're dealing with a guy like Andre Ward, that is a seriously hard advantage to overcome because he's just such a cerebral, thoughtful fighter. And maybe it's the way the fight played out that makes this seem really prescient, but the comparison between the two, the trash talk of the two men after the fight, Sergey Kovalev said all this stuff about how Ward couldn't hit hard, about how he was going to knock him out, how it was going to be way easier in the first fight, and how he outclassed Ward the last time. None of that came true. Whereas Ward basically said, I started breaking him in the last fight. I'm going to finish breaking him in this fight. And I think that did happen. So, I don't know. There's something to be said for the read that Andre Ward seems to have on his opponents. I thought he fought a brilliant sort of a gambit strategy here where he was giving away rounds, but knowing, almost as if knowing it was leading to a finish. But certainly giving away rounds knowing that Kovalev was going to be half the fighter he usually is after he was frustrated and kept missing and had been worn down by some body work. So I thought it was just a brilliant fight from Andre Ward. The ending was disappointing. Kind of sucks that it had to go out in that the sequence had to be so weird. That's Tony Weeks for you, by the way. To me, he's kind of the Herb Dean of boxing refereeing. He gets talked about as this amazing ref, but I think he's inconsistent, sometimes really good, sometimes really bizarre. It's strange that he missed a low blow on the finishing sequence, but it definitely stood out to me live that Kovalev didn't really protest. The stoppage happened, Kovalev didn't have much to say, and he was also he got hit low, but he's also just bent over at the ropes, not defending himself. I think a more confident Kovalev would have taken a low blow and would have stayed moving to try to protect his groin. Yeah, he might have dropped his hands and covered up, but he would have gotten a shoulder in front of his chin, moved his feet, tried to get away and let the ref know that he was hurt. Instead, he took a low blow, covered up, bent over, and sort of sat on the ropes and waited. So to me is
I think the shot that did it was not the ones in the finishing sequence. I think it was that body shot that I talked about before. That just brutal shot right to the solar plexus.
Yeah.
I think he was done when that shot landed, and the finishing sequence was just on top of it was just what happened on top of the keg.
It was essentially you got the feeling watching it. Yeah, he got hit low. It sucks, but it was essentially the body language of someone who turns their back and forces the referee to step in. So. Yeah. It wasn't the body language of a man who wanted to keep fighting. I thought Ward actually really did more so than last time assert himself as the cleverer and more complete fighter. So
what's funny to me is the reasons that you and I both pretty clearly love Andre Ward are the reasons why it feels like everybody in the boxing sphere just despises the ground that he walks on.
Yeah, it is strange to me. I mean, what do you think are the reasons people hate him so much?
I think because he pretty clearly picks and chooses his fights carefully.
Yeah.
The fact that he is a champion who had one of whose fights a commission refused to license because it would have been too big of a mismatch, I think sums up in fairly meaningful ways some of the perhaps issues with the way that Andre Ward picks and chooses his fights.
Sure.
I think that those are fair critiques. I think it's possible to criticize Andre Ward for the way that his career has been handled and separate that from what is pretty clearly his brilliance in the ring. You don't have to like Andre Ward. You don't even necessarily have to like the way that he fights. He's not trying to entertain you. That's not Andre Ward's goal. And if you want to criticize Andre Ward on those grounds because that's not how you think guys should fight, I think that there's some fairness to that in that you are a consumer who's paying money for a product, and entertainment is always going to be a part of what you're paying for in combat sports. Yeah. So, yeah.
But, people who question his matchmaking have to feel a little more optimistic now. 2 fights in a row with Sergey Kovalev. The best challenger he's ever faced, probably. and one win, both have their controversies surrounding them, but one decision that I think can certainly be defended, and I have no problem going to bat for it. And then one win that, while the ending was weird, I think did emphatically look like Andre Ward figuring out the best opponent of his career and outclassing him.
Do you need to see a trilogy fight? I don't.
No.
I mean, if one happens down the road, I'm not going to be like, oh, Ward Kovalev 3, not buying. But I don't need to see it right away. Like, I'm happy for Andre Ward to go off and fight somebody else.
Yeah, and he wants to do heavyweight. He said he
Really?
wants to. Yeah, he was like, it worked for Roy Jones. I think I might try heavyweight. He wants to be the little quick guy in a heavyweight division. He said he wants to do that, not for a full-time move, but
that seems nuts to me. That seems real crazy.
Who knows? I'm not going to not watch it though.
But you'd watch him fight a cruiserweight, right? Wouldn't you watch him fight like Usyk?
I'd watch him fight a heavyweight. I watch him fight a heavyweight. Roy Jones was a light heavyweight who went up to heavyweight. I would watch that.
It wasn't good though. Like, I think we need to.
Hey, Roy Jones had some really good moments. That was like, it was just before he really fell off that he moved to heavyweight, and he had some good moments.
Yeah, but those are not unconnected things. Like,
yeah,
he looked really good, and then he fell off a cliff.
Yeah, but like, Andre Ward is. I mean, how much time do we have? Are we reaching the heavyweight stage of his career? Well, how old is he?
No, he's like 33, right?
He's 33. Probably not a ton of time left. He's already reached the point where he could no longer cut weight to make his original weight class. We're seeing signs. This is old Andre Ward in a sense. So, who knows? I will definitely watch it if he fights like a mid-tier heavyweight. I will absolutely watch it.
Yeah.
I would like to see a little guy outclass a really big guy who's not as good as him. Why not? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to depend at this point too, because maybe the economics of Andre Ward's career will allow him to fight. Like, there just are not a lot of big fights for him at this point.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
I don't know exactly where you go.
I mean, he could, if Adonis Stevenson ever fought another like really tantalizing contender, then I would definitely watch Stevenson versus Ward. I think that would be a phenomenal fight. But yeah, there are not a ton of really tempting options for him out there, so we'll see. But he has now completed, I think, a pretty crucial stage of his career with 2 wins over Sergey Kovalev. Let us take one more break. When we come back, we're moving on to UFC Oklahoma City. This is UFC Chiesa versus Lee. Of course, the main event between lightweight contenders Michael Chiesa, Kevin Lee. Michael Chiesa loves his mom. Kevin Lee loves fancy shirts and hates buttons. And also on that card will be a couple other matchups that we will deign to talk about. All of that after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. If we had been recording during that last break, you would have heard an awful lot of grumbling. I'll tell you what, people listening at home, it's a little hard to look at this card and really find the fights that we need to talk about. It's a little hard to look at this card and see any fights that we need to talk about. And again, this is not to say that the matchmaking is not good. A lot of these fights make sense. This is the kind of thing that you do with a fight night card. You sort of do a sorting out every now and then where you just throw some people at each other and figure out how the divisions stand. But it's hard to fall in love with any aspect of this card,
Now, in fairness, there is another card this weekend, which is Bellator 180. So that has Phil Davis versus Ryan Bader. It has Douglas Lima versus Lorenz Larkin. Michael Chandler versus Brent Primus. Fedor, Chael Sonnen versus Vanderlei Silva.
That is a better card.
Yeah, if you nasty, you'll be tuning in for that.
That is a better card. Objectively, it's just a better card. Even just with just Davis Bader, even if it's not going to be a super fun fight, it automatically means more than anything that's happening here.
James Gallagher versus Shinzo Machida. Jesus, that is some fucking Spike Force shit right there.
I will watch that. I will absolutely watch that.
I do not know if I want to pay money for this pay-per-view. I mean, like Lima Larkin, I think is one of the 4 or 5 best welterweight fights that you could possibly make.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a really good fight.
Yeah.
So there's that, but man, old ass Chael versus old ass Vanderlei, like fucking Fedor, like 40-something-year-old Fedor against Matt Mitrione. Like,
yeah, but look at this. Look at this card, Pat. All right, what do we got? We got light heavyweight standouts: Joachim Christensen versus newcomer Dominic Reyes.
yeah, I mean, they're like,
That's a main card fight. Not that these are bad fighters.
It's all dog shit. It's all bad.
Yeah, it's like when Kid Nate does the care don't care. I'll have to say the disclaimer, like, we're not shitting on the fighters here, right? And they will, as they did the last 2 weekends, do their very best to turn in some really good fights. We're shitting on the matchmakers and the promoters for just putting together a card full of people who have yet to earn our interest and making the card made up entirely of that kind of fighter. People who have yet to do anything to really get us to want to pay attention. So anyway,
I mean, that's kind of the problem with Bellator in general. But like, do you have real quick? We didn't even discuss that we were going to talk about this. But like, do you have any thoughts on any of those meaningful fights?
I think Bader will probably beat Phil Davis.
Yep, I thought he would beat him the first time. Stood by that pick. He did, and I think he'll beat him again.
That was one of our first really prescient underdog picks, Pat. I remember we both went for Bader in that fight. I think he'll do it again. I think it was a tough fight. It was not easy. I think the wrestling exchanges are always going to be fascinatingly close between these two guys, which is part of what makes it such a compelling matchup again. But I think Bader's striking and takedown defense are going to be the solutions to Davis's sort of janky kickboxing and a style that isn't really built for him to get the takedowns he needs to beat people like Bader. Mm-hmm. What else is on this card? I have to bring it up.
Lima Larkin.
Bellator 180.
Yeah, I mean, the big one, I think, is Douglas Lima versus Lorenz Larkin, which is a really good fight. Not having done a lot of tape study for it, I think, I don't know, man. Like, I really think highly of what Larkin has put together in his last few fights.
Yeah, me too.
And Lima, too. I mean, Lima has been kind of very quietly very good for a very long time here. Like, his only losses are to Koreshkov and Ben Askren since 2009. Those are the only two guys he's lost to. And he avenged the Koreshkov loss. I kind of forgot about that. So, like, he's real good. He's a really, really good fighter. I just kind of think Larkin is going to be a slightly better striker. Like, I think Larkin is going to throw more, work a little more, and I don't think he's going to get taken down. What's the other one we need to think about here? I don't care about Chandler Primus.
Fedor, Mitrione.
I just don't want to. I don't want to live in a world where those fights are happening.
So maybe it's not.
But Aaron Pico, man, Aaron Pico could be the next big thing.
Maybe it's not really a better card than the UFC.
It depends on it depends on what you think about the ethics of combat sports, I suppose.
Sure.
Do you think it's ethical to be running 40+ guys out there who are held together by just copious amounts of performance-enhancing drugs, duct tape, and what some shady ass Russian physician is doing with blood platelets?
Yeah. Like chewing gum, a couple of bobby pins holding some of the joints together.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that if you're fine with tuning in to watch that product, and I think you can construct a position in which that's entirely ethically sound. I think that's okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're down for that, then go for it. But I myself am going to have some reservations about that, even as I probably tune in. So, but let's talk about Chiesa.
I have to say, that was the most scholarly approach I've ever heard someone take to a fucking Bellator pay-per-view. And the most scholarly language I ever hope to hear applied to a Bellator pay-per-view.
That's all fair. Fair.
Listen, you can come into this card with some questions about the ethics of the matchmaking. I love that.
I got yelled at by one of Bellator's PR guys for, which is not ironically why I don't cover Bellator, because fuck that guy. But if you're a PR person, you don't get to yell at a journalist via direct message on Twitter. That's just that is outside your job description. Like, you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
So. That's why I haven't written an article about Bellator since then, because it's marginal anyway, and people don't tune in for it, and people don't read it. So you're basically doing public service work.
Bellator's in a weird place where they have a surprising amount of casual interest. I think just by being on Spike, I guess, and by
UFC's
being on
that's exactly what it is. Like, you can ask people who do market research, and that's what they'll tell you.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, it's people who think that they're still watching the UFC. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, I know that.
Literally like a third or a half of their audience thinks they're watching UFC.
I have heard and spoken to people in real life who think that the sport is called UFC And it just doesn't matter to them. There are people who aren't really, they're not interested in being hardcore fans. They just enjoy fights, and like they know who Chuck Liddell is. Like that's the level of fan that Bellator gets. But it's weird because where frequently like you have to get to the really hardcore fans to get to talk to people who watch like Risen or ONE FC or Legacy or whatever. Like it's generally more hardcore fans that watch the even slightly smaller promotions. Those are the ones who will have conversations about that. And those people are not attracted to Bellator. That you will publish a Bellator article, and it seems like hardcore fans don't really care because it's all about casual appeal. So it's weird. They're in a weird spot. At least we know where the UFC stands. Let's go ahead and talk about this main event before we run out of time entirely. Michael Chiesa, Kevin Lee, both dudes got into it at the whatever, UFC promotional event that was. What's your take on the matchup, man?
I think it's an interesting fight, and I'm glad these guys are getting a main event spot because it's time to start moving new guys up.
Sure.
And I think we can see that with some of these bookings. Like there's like Sergio Pettis versus Brandon Moreno as a headliner. Like it's time for these younger guys who have been around in the promotion for 3, 4, 5 years in some cases now. Like they're not developing anymore. Like either it's sink or swim time, put them at the top of the card, let them see if they can hold their weight as personalities and as headliners. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that they're putting this fight together. With that said, I think it's going to be kind of a weird fight. That's more or less my read on it.
How so? How do you think it's going to be weird?
I think that it's a fight that Lee should win. I think the matchup favors him. I think he's a pretty good defensive wrestler. I think he's a meat and potatoes but fairly skilled kickboxer on the feet. But I think it's a fight that Chiesa will win because Lee I think Lee will be winning it right up until the moment that he loses it, if that makes sense.
He's in that sort of Scoggins position where it's maybe not with the same level of consistency, but you do watch him fight. And it's weird, actually. He's only had the one fight that really didn't go his way. But you just get this feeling like he's just setting himself up for some kind of weird ending all the time.
Yeah, it's very strange watching Kevin Lee because you get a sense for how good he might be, and then you see him do something that is not smart or he gets caught with a shot. Like, there's always something weird that happens in his fights, and it's usually of his own making. So I'll give you an example of this. He gets caught with a lot of clean shots. Like, he doesn't get hit percentage-wise really all that much. It's not like you look at those numbers and you're like, oh, this is a terrible defensive fighter. But he's one of those dudes who, when he gets caught real clean.
Yeah.
Because he'll do things like when he throws a body kick, his head just stays right on the center line and his hands go down. Like, he's there to be countered basically every shot that he throws.
He's, especially with his boxing, I've noticed, he's always had a habit of kind of watching his work. Throwing some punches and then just hanging out right there on the edge of range. I will say this. Kevin Lee has also struck me as a guy who has maybe been a bit of an overthinker, a guy who wants to try all kinds of things, who has the personality that lends itself to that sort of like encyclopedic knowledge of MMA moves. And I think that you could see that even in his first UFC fight when he fought Al Iaquinta, and he was like some kid who clearly was not a very good boxer, and he was trying to shoulder roll and shit, you know? Mm-hmm. Like he was just like trying to have this really crazy game where he has all these options to turn to. And when the difficulty for people like that is like the more options you have, the harder it can be for you to choose from among them. I think that's always been the problem for like Josh Berkman, for example. And maybe part of the reason why as a veteran, as he's picked up more and more ways to approach the fight game, he's almost become more inconsistent. Not in that he's more fragile or other obvious effects of age, but he just gets into these weird ruts where he has all these things he can throw very well, so he throws none of them. Like he can't decide. For Lee, I think that often rears its head in the form of him like thinking. You will get these bouts of inactivity. Then he'll do something. It'll be like all right, I've done the jab, hook, cross, uppercut. Okay, I've thought this combination out. I'm going to do it. So he throws this combination. Pretty good. It's a little rote. It looks rehearsed, but that's because he spent so much time thinking about it. And then once it's done, once he's executed the thing he's been planning for the last 30 seconds, like he's done thinking. Like he's done it, and then he's just there. And you have to remind him he's still in the fight, and often that happens in the form of a big counter right hand.
Yeah. I mean, like the way his fight with Trinaldo was really instructive because that was a fight from the get-go that favored Kevin Lee. It was a favorable matchup for him, fighting a dude who doesn't have fantastic takedown defense, who doesn't have a great bottom game at all, which really is at the core of what Lee does. Like, we've been talking about his striking, and I think Lee, on a basic level, in addition to everything you talked about, I think that's absolutely correct with the overthinking. He is just nowhere near as good a striker as he thinks he is.
Yeah.
So, like, I think that's kind of his root problem there is, yes, you're right. He's overthinking it. He's running through this. It's rote. It's this. It's that. It's the other thing. But he's just not as good as he thinks he is.
And I think there's a lot more room for overthinking on the ground. Like, I think in MMA in general, this is something I'd like to talk about more sometime. I think MMA is kind of the place where you compare it to boxing, and cornermen really have a place of prominence in MMA that does not exist in boxing. We really, like, corner advice, I think, can have a huge effect on a fight that, while it's obviously useful in boxing, it's not as supplemental in MMA. It's really good to have a steady hand in the corner. And I think it's because with grappling, when you get these slower exchanges where you're tying up and holding a position, which is not like striking, just like an encyclopedic knowledge of position works. It's useful. And so having someone in the corner who can kind of just play you like a video game character, just tell you what to do to progress from position to position, that works. And by the same token, fighters who think a lot, who are very cerebral, I think do well on the ground because they have a few moments to collect themselves and plan their next move. That is rarely the case on the feet. Overthinking almost always gets you into trouble on the feet because everything happens so quickly. And the moment you execute a move, you don't get to settle into a position. You have to move. Everything in striking is like you want to be able to think big picture, while the little details, the defensive move after every strike, the pivots, the rolls, the blocks, exiting on a jab, all of that should really be drilled in to the point where you might see the opening, but you don't really have to. It doesn't have to reach your brain before you react to it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that little point of disconnect is exactly that is where Lee lives on the feet.
Yeah, that is
right in that little slice right there.
Yeah, that little no man's land is where he constantly finds himself stuck.
Yeah, which is why he had trouble on the feet with Mustafayev and with Trinaldo, who are both very much like, let's act and then we'll think and then we'll deal with the consequences of it later.
Yeah.
Kinds of fighters who are very, very fast, very athletic, and there's no disconnect at all between what they're planning on doing and what they end up doing.
Yeah.
So that's tough for him. And now Chiesa is not that kind of guy, but Chiesa is the kind of guy who, if you let him scramble at all, and Lee's wrestling style does allow for some scrambling. If you let him scramble at all, you are going to create opportunities for him.
Yeah.
Chiesa, while not a good striker, I want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
He is a pretty good counterpuncher, which I think is one of those things you get with these dudes who don't come from like a real technical striking camp, but where they spar a shitload.
Yeah, and you know that the dudes over there in Seattle, what's the gym called?
Not in Seattle, in Spokane.
Washington,
man.
Sorry.
Like,
I should never have foisted the burden that is Rick Little and his crew on Seattle.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, Spokane is a very special kind of place, and Michael Chiesa and Sam Sicilia and Rick Little and Juliana Pena are real fucking Spokane. Like, that's, I mean that seriously.
Yeah,
like,
but
no,
you know from the mentality of Little, you just know from those fighters, that's a gym where a large portion of the pro fight team training is hard sparring. And you can see that
guys beating the shit out of each other.
Yeah, and you can, you can see the benefits of that. We've reached this weird place in MMA where now, because we know that too much sparring can be dangerous, you see a lot of fans all over who will tell people like, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing hard sparring. There's no point in sparring hard. The Thais only do light sparring." Well, the Thais fight every week. You know, like you need to be in there mixing it up, getting hit, having your adrenaline flowing. I think that is people have succeeded without it, but it's crucial. And you can see that without much technical striking at all, without, really anything resembling kickboxing technique, Michael Chiesa is a remarkably effective fighter on the feet. And I think you could probably attribute most of that to the fact that he just knows what it feels like to be in a fight. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't freak out. He's comfortable finding his shot, and he's comfortable taking a shot if he needs to, which he frequently does. But he does those things pretty damn well. Better, I think, than Kevin Lee does. I think Chiesa is just a little more comfortable, even if Kevin Lee is the more technical striker, has the better form. Chiesa's just bizarre, like leaping left front kicks and long lunging left hands and weird shift combinations. He executes them because he knows they're about to work. He's never guessing. He's never thinking. He just feels it because he knows what a fight feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the outcome here, I think Lee should win this fight. I think Chiesa will win it. But it also wouldn't surprise me if Lee came out just looking way better and just fucking curb stomped Chiesa. That also would not surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth remembering Kevin Lee is 24. He has a lot of room to grow. And I would not be surprised to see him. He debuted in 2012. He's probably coming up on his prime in maybe a year or two still. So I would not be surprised to see him turn the corner any moment now. But going off what we've seen in the past, I find myself agreeing. I think Lee is going to have a lot of good moments. I think at some point Chiesa is going to drag him into a scramble, catch him with a weird shot, and find some way to jump on his back and, do the only thing that Michael Chiesa really knows how to do, which is rear naked choke fools.
Yeah. And like, it's worth noting too, as if that seems like a somewhat unlikely outcome to you on the basis of what we've talked about, Lee, while a good offensive takedown artist, a really good offensive takedown artist, does not have bulletproof takedown defense.
Yeah.
Like, he has been taken down on multiple occasions before.
Chiesa is a tricky wrestler as well. He's got a little bit of that Damian Maia thing going on. Different approach, but he has that thing where he is just glued to you when he gets his hands around you.
He's a real nasty clinch fighter, and I think if there is an actual demonstrable weakness in Lee's game, it's that I don't think he does much in the clinch. I don't think he really knows what he's doing there.
That's a very good point. The Escudero fight, a lot of inactivity in the clinch. Yeah, he kind of.
I think he thinks of it as a place to hold and a place to rest, and that is not what Chiesa does when he gets those just like long ass comical scarecrow arms wrapped around you.
Sure. Yeah. All right, well, I think that's all we really need to talk about for this card. That is, I think, the most compelling fight. I'm not dissatisfied with it as a main event. It maybe doesn't have that big name draw that you want, but these are probably some of the guys who will be populating the top 10 or top 5 in a couple of years. So,
Oh, real quick, travesty that Tim Boach versus Johnny Hendricks was not contested on Father's Day. The two most dad-ass fighters that I can imagine at this point.
They came as close as they could, Yeah, just a few days after Father's Day.
Yeah. So just shout out to that, but otherwise not talking about it.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about it for the show. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Before we wrap up, let's go ahead and talk about what we've got coming out this week. It's been a little bit of an inactive time for me, personally, Pat. I'm not sure what I'm working on. Have a lot of things sort of milling around and never quite coming to completion, but I hit upon an idea, something that I would like to do more frequently, which is just to talk about journeyman in a series. And the last 2 events have provided a lot of that, a lot of good journeyman stuff. So I want to kind of celebrate some of the grimy veterans who, for whatever reason, often it's athleticism or some other kind of innate talent that just can't break through into the top 5, but are still very solid fighters. We had Mizuto Hirota. We had even a pretty good veteran performance from Andrei Arlovsky. We just had some nice showings over the last 2 weeks. So I think I'll be talking about that. And I don't know what else. There will be a Sherdog preview, however, of UFC Oklahoma City, a.k.a. UFC Chiesa versus Lee. What about you, man?
I don't think I'm writing anything this week. I wrote that piece for Deadspin last week on Mayweather McGregor. I came out last Friday. I don't think I'm writing anything about MMA, at least for, probably a couple of weeks until the first week of July, until UFC 213. I do have a new Fall of Rome coming out this week. Going to be talking about some hypotheticals. Going to be talking about why didn't the Roman Empire fall earlier? Why did it stick around? Decided to embrace some of that. Maybe think a little in terms of those hypotheticals. Thought it'd be fun.
I feel as if maybe the conversations on heavy hands are affecting the direction of your other show.
Yeah, a little bit. And also, I talked to a really eminent historian last month from Stanford, a guy named Walter Scheidel, who has written some really, really excellent, like big picture kind of thinking books. And he's like, I think counterfactuals are an essential tool if you want to consider very large questions in history. So
that was a good accent. I appreciated that. That was really went to bat for that one.
That's my German guy who's been living in the United States for the last 3 decades accent.
That's pretty good. I feel like the only really good German to English word I can say is the word German, because Germans don't say it themselves, so they have a bizarre pronunciation. They say, "I'm German."
Yeah,
German. It's almost a CH and a very clipped sound.
German. Yeah.
Germans are weird people, by the way. Do we have any German listeners? Because I want to tell you,
we absolutely do. Yeah.
You love rules far too much. I know this from my time in Germany. Here's something I experienced in Germany, Pat. Germans do not cross the street when it's not at crosswalks. At least people around
That's a true statement.
People around the Munich area, they will shake their heads and scowl at you if they see you crossing in the middle of the street. It's not. They love rules. The other one, you go to a movie theater. No one at the movie theater tells you have to obey the seating on your ticket. Because, a lot of theaters, default tickets have seating on them. But a lot of theaters, you don't have to have an assigned seat. You'll go into a showing. there's one other person there. Your ticket in sequence is right after theirs. A German will sit next to that one other person in the theater. And I have seen it happen. I've been in the theater with but 2 other people. 2 strangers came in, they looked at their tickets, and they sat right next to each other. So
that's incredible.
You are a fascinating people with a fascinating accent and a love of order. And also, you drink beer in the factories at lunch. I know that's true as well.
Dude, I'm a big fan of Germany. I enjoyed my trips to Germany.
Me too. Yeah.
But that, dude, that's about all I got going. This is going to be the last Fall of Rome episode that goes up on this feed exclusively.
Wow.
New show's launching next month.
Cool.
I'm not going to say the exact date because I don't know how my partners are going to feel about that. But new show's coming. New show's coming soon. So keep your ears peeled for details.
Looking forward to it, man. I have been reading, by the way, Xenophon's Hellenica. That's my history, my touch of history for the time being.
Look at old Mr. Primary Sources over here.
Well, you know, I did enjoy the Anabasis so much. I thought I might move on to some of his.
Dude, I told you you'd enjoy the Anabasis.
It was
marching down.
Good. It was genuinely good. Anybody who wants to read a history that reads like a pretty solid book, it's a good one. Anyway, we've gone on too long. That was your brief little tidbit of history knowledge that some people apparently enjoy hearing on this show. Very. It's pertinent information. You have to understand history to understand, fights. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have been Conor Ruebusch and Patrick Wyman. Get at us on social media. I'm at Boxing Bush. It's BUSCH. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman, WYMAN. And call him doctor when you address him, please. And you know what? You can do the same for me as well. I won't complain. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will catch you next week. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.